throw it to the other side, see how they answer this question. How did worms evolve? I'm assuming that says according to evolution. Anyone care to weigh in on the supposed
Diane, you can
evolution of
take that one to
worms?
start with.
Well, the standard story is that worms were one of the first things to evolve because they have a fairly simple structure. But the standard story is we started off with single cells which somehow got together and made sort of group cells, and then they started to specialize. And so you have different specialist cells all within the one structure. So worms are considered to be fairly early on in that process. But if you actually look at worms, they're quite complicated and they're well designed for the work that they've been given to do in the soil. So how did worms evolve? Well, worms couldn't have evolved because if you go from a single cell to a worm, you've got a huge amount of new information that's needed, and we have no idea how that could happen all by itself. You cannot get information without a mind being on the job. So if you want to make worms, and scientists are actually working on biomechanists, are working on things that can actually sort of wriggle on the ground like worms. It's a useful thing to be able to do. And it requires a lot of clever engineering and a lot of clever biomechanics. So how did worms evolve? They couldn't have evolved, but there's plenty of evidence that they are well designed.
Now, if you've never seen a fossil worm, there's one from my collection. I have dozens of them. Can you spot him just there? All right. All right.
That he is.
Yeah, there he is there. Notice he's preserved with his little segments all going through. He's a marine worm, but I have plenty of fossil worms, particularly down from Kangaroo Island, Cambrian worms, etc., that they're supposedly right on the Cambrian, pre-Cambrian boundary. So the one thing that's evident, they appear and they fit the same characteristic that puzzled Charles Darwin. When worms first appear, they seem to always reproduce worms, which, by the way, even if you put the layers in vast amounts of time, worms produce their own kind and they're easy to recognize. I took a young girl on one field trip down on Kangaroo Island, had a look at some of the rocks, and there were worms, and I asked her what they were, and she said they're worms. Right, so you don't need a PhD in wormology to recognize a fossil worm at all. They shout, 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 I am created. I've been a worm ever since I got on this planet, and as we talked to Diane for more than half an hour, without worms, nothing happens in the whole life cycle. So that's how crucial that they really are.